Okay, thank you. Oh, Sequoia is gone, but that was beautiful and wonderful. And now I'm really happy to introduce Len, who's been so supportive with working with our Four Directions team, but also with the broader collaborative practice team, and coming to us today to talk about, like Sequoia said, strength, grace, and resilience, and how to take care of each other in a dual health crisis. So thank you, Len. Welcome.
Hi, Chika. Thank you so much, Kirsten. And Ace-Whale, good day, everybody. It is so good to see you. Happy National Nurses Week. I hope that your week has been full of amazing things. As I know very much how much you are all deserving of that. In just the little bit of time that I get to spend with some of you. It's such an honor to see you in your spot, in your place, and the magic and the roles and the work that you do, and just the incredible value that it means for the people that we serve. So on behalf of our communities, on behalf of our peoples and our relatives, who benefit from your service and from your work, I raise my hands to each and every one of you for, whatever it is that you roll out of bed for and put your shoes on, or maybe you don't, maybe we come to walk to the screen and do the work that we need to do, whatever it is. Really thank you wholeheartedly for all of the work that you do. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Len Pierre. My ancestral name is Palikwilak. I am Coast Salish from Katzie First Nation, and I am very proud to be the cultural advisor with our Four Directions wellness team supporting our NJN work, which is not just naloxone. I was really happy and honored to be invited back to share some words today about, originally I was asked to kind of come back and talk a little bit about hope and a little bit about resilience in the context of care. Working in two public health emergencies. The last time I was here and shared a little bit of space with you all, we talked about decolonizing healthcare systems, where we kind of look back at, where our journey has taken us so far, and then started to kind of look forward in terms of how much more work that we need to do. And I feel very humbled and honored to be invited back to share some more words on this very important work of taking care of each other, in a time of a dual health crisis. So it is no small thing that I want to really hold that space. That is no small thing to be able to hold this space this afternoon. I realize that I may be all that there is between you and a beautiful weekend. So I really do want to emphasize that, our time here probably will not take up the full 2 hours. And I kind of look to you for your guidance and your wisdom and your resonating with this conversation to see how far we will go and to how far we will stretch it. As I know that the great work that you do is in the care and service of other people. Throughout our time together today, let me take care of you. Sit back and learn and listen. For many of the things that I will be saying, I know I'm talking to my Indigenous relatives, brothers and sisters on the line here. A lot of this, are shared teachings that we have gotten from our elders. For many of you, if you get a couple of golden nuggets of some Indigenous cultural teachings that you're walking away with today, then I feel that I have, done my part. And if you find some hope and healing and inspiration in today's conversation, which is my aim, my goal, then I think then we have kind of done our work here today. And what a powerful way to kind of end the week and move forward into a weekend where I will take care of you at the end and honor you with a closing activity and a prayer as well, just as Sequoia has opened us up. So with that, my intention here really is to, I am going to talk a little bit about the context in which we're showing up to our work too. And when I say the context, it's kind of like those things that we're up against that kind of pinch us off a little bit from our sense of wellness, our sense of resilience, our sense of grace in the work that we want to do. And sometimes it's our own strength and the things that weigh us down. And I just want to put those on the table, not to make us feel bad, but to really put us all on the same page. Just like, yeah, we're in this, right? These are the things that we're up against, working in a dual health crisis. And I put them only up there so that we're all on the same page, and really validating how we're feeling too. Because I often feel like my sense is, and I don't know if you agree, that it's not often where we're validated in what we're experiencing and what we're feeling. Sometimes, when we're just so busy in working in a crisis that we are go, 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 go. And then it's not until the crisis is over that we look back and we're like, wow, like that was a lot that we went through. And I would just like to use this time as a pause and just say, hey, we are going through a lot. And it's not just to weigh us down and talk about the negative. It's just to say that this is the context in which we're showing up to this conversation. This is the context in which we are rolling out of bed every single day. This is the context in which, we are reaching for our strength, reaching for our sense of grace, reaching for our humility and resiliency. That's the kind of intention that I want to hold here. So I'm going to start sharing my screen. And so this is, your space, your safe space, your virtual space. I am just here to guide and to care for you in this space and time. So you make yourselves comfortable. You feel free to turn your cameras off, sit back and relax. I like to lay down on the floor. I think I mentioned that last time. I have like this roller by my desk that I like to roll out on. And then I will ask you to interact. I'm going to try out a new thing today. It's like this whiteboard feature, but it's on Google. I'm going to see if I can get some folks contributing in that regard. I promise I won't make you work too much though, because I know you've had a long week. So with that, bear with me 1 second here. I'm going to start sharing my screen. Go ahead and feel free to turn your cameras off if that makes you comfortable. And just let me start steering this canoe. Okay. Okay, when it came to, talking about, when I was invited back to talk about, can we talk a little bit about hope and a little bit about inspiration and caring for one another in a dual health crisis? The words that immediately kind of ever came to me were that strength, grace, and resilience. Because when I thought about crisis, what I really went to is champions of crisis, and this is a moment of strength for us as Indigenous peoples, is that Indigenous people on Turtle Island are champions of crisis. We have endured many, 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 many crises and continue to do so, that it's almost a reflection of our own crisis humility to reduce crisis down to two. Yes, these are global and massively widespread, but in a First Nations context, especially for our First Nations communities that we serve, it's almost holding true to that humility that our First Nations communities are kind of up against a lot more crises that we don't often speak about. Mental health, what we call suicidality, poverty, and then of course, we are heading into the summer season where there's wildfires. Wildfire season is upon us, and flooding season is upon us in the Lower Mainland and other parts of the province. Those drive up the element of crisis in our communities too. And so, we are no strangers to what we call crisis in today's day and age. And then, reflecting on that championing of that work, that we are strong. We continue to tackle a crisis, get through it, get over it, go around it, tackle it, dismantle it, and then another one will present itself, and we're like, okay, yeah, and then we have to tackle on another one. But we do so with such strength, and there's elements of that strength that I would like to explore today too, using the 7 sacred teachings that we're probably, most of us are familiar with. But it's not just we do it with strength, there's also grace that we never forget about. There's this misconception about, the stoic Indigenous warrior that is just, going to tackle this head on. There's also an undeniable beauty in the grace in how we deal with crisis. And when we talk about decolonization, reconciliation, and indigenization, there is something to be learned from Indigenous communities, Indigenous knowledge, and Indigenous values in how we respond to crisis, how we show up to crisis, how we internalize crisis, and then ultimately transform that crisis. And one of the most unique things that I have found over the years in just the very short span of my career is that we do so with such grace. And often that grace takes the shape and form of being still, being quiet, listening, being present, helping one another and supporting one another. And then even when you don't have a lot to give, rolling your sleeves up and helping out in the kitchen. Those are lessons that I have gained from my own experience in working in Indigenous communities in times of crisis. Is that we have an incredible grace about us that is really united in this sense of unity, in this sense of solidarity. And I thought of no better word to describe than working together in time of crisis, like for us as a team at First Nations Health Authority, than to center our own grace about how we will show up. And then, of course, our resilience, which I appreciated what Sequoia said, is that we have deep-rooted resilience within our First Nations communities across the province and across Turtle Island, for that regard, that we can call upon and work intentionally and meaningfully in times of crisis. So as I've mentioned the last time I spoke, when I was talking about decolonizing healthcare systems, we often open up with the land acknowledgement and the territorial protocol, but it's only in my own learning of myself that there are actually 5 protocols specific to the Coast Salish region for doing good work. And the territory acknowledgement is only the first one. So my point of departure today is I would like to honor and recognize that I'm calling in from my own home territory of Katzie First Nation, located in the Lower Mainland in North Langley, Walnut Grove. And that is shared traditional territory with our sister nation, Kwantlen First Nation. I would like to express gratitude for all of our colleagues in nursing for National Nursing Week. And thank each and every one of you for being here, taking the time to be here, being present, and participating in today's discussion. It is no small thing that we are able to work in the organization that we do and come together for the purpose of health, taking care of each other, leaning in on what wellness means in times of crisis. I work for and deal with a couple of different health authorities, as do many of us, in the work that we do as a provincial organization. And, I haven't seen Fraser Health, Vancouver Health, or Island Health, talk about, how we can take care of each other in a health crisis in a committee such as this. And so I think that is something to be grateful for as well. Number 3, where you are from and who I belong to. So I am a Coast Salish person belonging to Katzie First Nation on my father's side and Musqueam First Nation on my mother's side. Protocol number 4 is listening and doing what is asked of you. And protocol 5 is loving one another. And I know love is one of those funny words, like, whoa, love, what do you mean love? And we really need to, I think, decolonize our sense of the word love. Because you can call it care, you can call it compassion, you can call it being cool and groovy with somebody, whatever it is, it's being a good human being to one another, where the other human being feels good about that in return. And I aim to, and I have an intention of holding that space throughout our entire time here today. So I would like to begin by kind of reflecting on our own strengths. What is the strength? And then, to reframe it, what is your superpower for your own work? Wherever your seat is, whatever your role in our organization is, what is it that really is the driving force, the foundation, your strength foundation for the work that you do? And I just wanted to share some 4 examples for myself. Like, these are the things that I am calling upon when the road gets rocky or the water gets choppy. I'm always reaching for these 4 key strengths of my own. Number 1 is my daughter. In the first picture there, I was a single parent at 21 years old. And my daughter has become the most amazing teacher in my life. She's now 14. This is from a while ago. And she really is a driving force for, being my superpower and how I show up to do this work. And the work I do is speaking to all 3 health crises that we are in. The overdose crisis, the global pandemic, and then, of course, the anti-Indigenous racism that we are encountering in our healthcare system. I speak and consult on all 3 fronts of health crises. And, at the end of the day, those conversations can bear you down. And for those of you who also engage in those conversations, and I know many of us do, working for First Nations Health Authority, you know, we're kind of up against these really large belief systems, these corporate systems, these colonial systems that sometimes just wear us down and grind us down to, you know, where we might not have a lot left to give. But there's something ancient and natural, innate in my daughter that just has this innocence and awareness that she gives me reminders of how to be a good human being. And it's almost like she has this sense where she know when I'm kind of getting down and out. She's like, oh, you want to watch a movie together? Which teenagers never do, or hopefully if your teenager wants to do that, you're really lucky, because, you know, it was one of the most heartbreaking things is when my daughter became a teenager and all of a sudden it wasn't cool to hang out with your dad anymore. So now when she wants to hang out, you know, it's usually at moments where I'm like feeling like I really need it. So I find her to be an incredible source of my own strength. She really fills my cup. The second is my own spirituality, and how I practice my spirituality, and recognizing that I'm a spiritual entity, interacting and engaging with other people that are not just their clever minds, like many of us like to think we are, but also our restless spirits as well. And I really hold spirituality as one of my core strengths. I also look to my ancestors as incredible sources of my strength. I think it is no small thing that I can be and have the opportunities that I have today to speak publicly, to work for health organizations, to be invited to do good work. You know, if it wasn't for the blood, sweat, and tears of my ancestors, no small thing. And I think that, you know, a lot of the opportunities and benefits that I get today are because of the sacrifices of people that had a faith that that somewhere down the road, you know, one of their future generations were going to be holding the space that I'm kind of holding today. And I really call deep on that when I'm presented with a challenge or presented with a new idea or a new project, and I have doubts or those kinds of things. So I really hold ancestors. I always say that I have an army of ancestors behind me to help me in this good work. And then, of course, my own faith. And when I say faith, you know, it's not just, you know, the belief in the creator or the belief in the universe or the cosmos. You know, that's, I think, a really good starting point. But I think that when we can transform our faith to not just be external, but also internal faith, and the belief in yourself, the belief in your strength, the belief in your grace, the belief in your own resiliency as a human being to do the work that you need to do every single day. Over the span of you know, a crisis that has, you know, now gone over well over a year, is no small thing, and that is something to be celebrated too. And I offer that, you know, as a if that's, you know, a new concept or a new idea for you, is to not just only seek faith outwardly, but also seek faith inwardly. That when things get tough, it's like also just reminding yourself, just as much as you're praying to the creator and praying to the universe and praying to God, to also pray for yourself, to pray to your inner spirit to kind of guide you through some of those crises that we might encounter. So the next thing, the part I want to try and experiment with is a whiteboard activity where I'm going to ask you to share your strength, your superpower. I'm just going to paste it in the chat box here. There's a link coming shortly, if I can figure it out. No, it's not working for me. Try this. Edit. Okay, I might have lost it. Why is it not pasting for me? We might not be able to do it, folks, and I apologize. Oh, now I start sweating. This is like facilitator anxiety. Share. Copy. Chat box. That's weird. I've never not been able to paste a link into the chat box before.
I think, Len, because you're copying from Chrome and pasting into Chrome, like selecting the paste option when Chrome is still open. It might work better if you right click into the chat box and select or paste that way.
Okay, I can't right click because I'm on a Mac.
I think it's control click if you're on a Mac.
Or Command V.
Sorry, what was that? Control?
Command C and Command V.
Oh, no, something's really weird is happening. Okay, so we're not going to do that. We're going to bypass that. Sorry, everyone. Okay, so the question really is, I'll have to play around with that one to figure it out. I just learned it yesterday, so I'm all like teacher mode. I'm like, I could do that. Let's go here. I'm just going to share my screen again. Maybe in the chat box, if you can just share with the group, if you are okay, if you are comfortable, what is your strength? What is the strength that you bring to your work? What is your superpower? You know, I shared with you all that mine is my daughter, my spirituality, my ancestors, and of course, you know, my faith and where my faith kind of comes from. And the reason I wanted, so if you can start populating that into the chat box, thank you so much. And thank you for participating. And the reason really is to why we're doing this, because it's important as adults that we know why we're doing this. It is to, you know, get to know one another and also just celebrate and zero in on what our strengths are, because showing up to do the work that we need to do in a time of crisis really is about honoring and recognizing the strength within you, loving and caring for aspects of your strengths, your superpowers, and taking care of them so that they are nurtured in these times. So aspects of trust, relationships, family, sense of humor, yes. Oh, I love that one. Willingness to assist, love of connection, empathy and vulnerability, loving very deeply, positivity. Positivity is a superpower to a T. Humor, family perspective, relationship building, values, optimism, connection. Beautiful. Thank you, everybody. Your soulmates, patients, elders, friends, spirit, family, values, connecting to nature, yes. Land. Allowing voice. Teachings from mom, aunties, uncles, grandparents, singing and drumming, beautiful. Positivity, sense of humor, and bubbliness, yes. Love it. My family, my team, and books. Grace, this is what I'm told by colleagues. Calmness. Sharing food when it's safe again. Yep. Beating. Love it. Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much for sharing that and contributing that. I'm starting to calm down on the sweating on my end. And you know, I've when I do cultural safety training work and decolonization training work with teams and sites and services, often we will do that activity of like, what is your superpower? Because and I always say that the reason we do this activity is for when the road is going to get bumpy and the water gets choppy on this learning journey, you know, what we're going to want to call upon is our strengths. And you'll notice that, you know, while a lot of us have very similar strengths, you know, not every single one of us will have the exact same strengths. So that diversity in strengths is something to celebrate as well. So to kind of set, and this is where I wanted to be very transparent and really honor kind of, I don't mean to share these points, these 8 points, to make us feel down and out. What I really need to do is validate that this is kind of this is kind of our landscape. This is what we're showing up to work in right now when we're talking about the dual health crisis, the triple health crisis. So what I know for sure is, and let me know if you agree with me, or disagree, because there's safe time and space here for that as well. Number one thing I know for sure, the work does not end at 5 o'clock. Do you agree? In a time of COVID and moving everything, from the office to at home, I know that the work doesn't end at 5 o'clock, that you will pick up your phones and maybe open your laptops because of the demanding nature of your work, or, because of our own emotional, cultural, or social investment in our work. So I talk about anti-Indigenous racism for a living. I talk about the opioid crisis for a living. That work never leaves me because I have an emotional and cultural investment into those things, because Indigenous peoples are severely impacted by those two healthcare crises. And I know that I share that experience with many of you. So I want to validate and say what I know for sure is, for many of us, the work does not end at 5 o'clock or necessarily for a weekend. I know that, and I know for sure that a lot of our work goes unnoticed in a time of isolation. You know what? Where there's a lot less side chatter and side conversations that do end up happening. Number 3, I know that we often forget to celebrate the unmeasurables. When we work in a very corporate healthcare system, we're often driven by statistics and numbers and strategies, and kind of really forget or overlook, the celebration of things that we can't even measure. And that's largely, how we're feeling and how we're showing up to this work, or what our own personal achievements are, our cultural achievements, something that we've learned, something that we've celebrated and succeeded, a barrier that we have overcome that we never kind of really saw coming. So I want to honor and recognize that. I also want to honor and recognize that we're in information overload. When it comes to the overdose crisis, COVID-19 and systemic racism regarding anti-Indigenous racism in the healthcare system, it's really hard to escape that kind of information. Number 1, because it's in the news and media every single day. It's in our social media channels, and it is also in family-based conversations. And then for a lot of us too, it happens when we walk outside our homes and we experience racism ourselves. We see, overdoses happening within our communities. We have a loved one or somebody that we very much care about, a relative or a friend or a colleague who has contracted COVID, or we've lost somebody to COVID-19. So information overload, it's really hard to safely detach your identity and your well-being from that. I just want to honor and recognize that. If you feel that. Not all of us are going to feel all of these things, or maybe any of these things. Number 5, the burden of never-ending and densely scheduled virtual meetings. Maybe I'm the only one that feels this, but all of a sudden, I don't think I've ever spent more time in meetings before COVID happened. And so I end up spending, my time in meetings from 9 o'clock in the morning until 5 o'clock in the afternoon. Unless you're a clinician, because there's something about clinicians that like to start at 8:30 in the morning on the dot. And then of course, then you have a mountain of emails and a whole bunch of projects and reports and summaries that need to be written after the fact. Hence, the work also doesn't end at 5 o'clock sometimes. The burden of, oh no, I covered that one. Disconnecting issues. It's really hard to disconnect sometime. In a time of physical distancing and social isolation, it's like, well, you can't disconnect from your phone. It's hard to disconnect from your laptop, and that's a challenge. I don't know about anybody else, but it's really played a toll on my attention ability. I've always struggled with attention anyway. That's why my sweet spot is in facilitation and instruction in public speaking, is because I can zero in and be focused on multiple things. But I've always struggled with kind of like attention deficit. And I feel like that's kind of a lot more these days. And of course, screen fatigue. I don't just have, work that is done on the computer. There's also community work that I'm involved in too, whether it's community advisories or just engaging with some meetings with my own Katzie First Nation that are band politics or advisory committees. I attend those, and it's like, or for those of us who are in school, you just get so overwhelmed with being on the screen. And I just want to honor and recognize that. This is, kind of when we want to talk about strength, grace, and resilience, it's like, well, what do we need our strength for? We need our strength to kind of cope with these. What do we need our grace for? We need our grace to be able to interweave and play and navigate our world and our professionalism around each of these things that are presenting themselves as barriers in our lives. And when it comes to our resilience, we need to be able to bounce back from these on a daily, on a weekly, or maybe it's now becoming an annual kind of thing. What we all know for sure is that, you know, while we often talk about the dual health crisis, there is an often forgotten or not spoken about health crisis. And that is the amount of anti-Indigenous racism that exists in our healthcare system. And that is something that we talk about in NJN. And that is something that I talk about often at the health authority level when people say things like the dual health crisis. Because it is a health crisis if we have an entire population that will not access healthcare services to take care of their primary care needs out of fear of being treated with disrespect, unsafe practices, or blatant racism. So I say that it is a healthcare crisis, and I know that I share that with many of you. Crisis humility is what I was talking about earlier, and just honoring and recognizing that while we can reduce the crisis to 3, that there are many people out there, many communities, many marginalized and targeted communities that are experiencing multiple crises on a daily or a weekly. And many of those that I've listed: wildfires, poverty, lack of housing, suicidality among young people in their community. You know, there's a lot more that's kind of going on. And you know, with that, you know, that humility piece is like, okay, what we can pray for in our prayers, in our professional practices, is to pray for humility and exercise our humility. Because that really kind of puts a social perspective on how we're showing up to this work too. And then burnout versus fatigue. I think that I just like to say that, you know, for those of us who might have been feeling or might be feeling at this very moment, a sense of burnout. Burnout is a word that I'm not very much a fan of, because it's implied that we as staff are burning out, that we are fizzling out, and that kind of has this implication that we're kind of like running out of juice, and that's a problem of our own. But I don't think that this is burnout if we are feeling that. I think this is just fatigue. It is fatigue from going and going and going and going and responding to the nature of our work, because the nature of our work is in response to the health and well-being of the communities that we serve. And in a time of a triple health crisis, the needs are significant. And I want to honor and recognize that, because we are still here and we still do amazing, amazing work. There is grief and loss. There is grief and loss in this very room, in this very space. There's grief and loss that we encounter in the meetings across the entire province. And, you know, there's grief and loss in communities, and that has a direct reflection on how we show up to conversations and in planning stages within our meetings at First Nations Health Authority, because people are dying due to overdose, due to COVID, and there's a sense of grief when we have loved ones of our own who have, you know, very traumatizing experiences and stories of experiencing racism and hate. Isolation and helplessness. And then, of course, you know, this is what we talked about in decolonizing systems as well, is that we have a very corporate system. And that corporate system is rather a trickle down kind of system, right? You know, often we get, you know, a request at 4 p.m. on an afternoon to have a, you know, this like 25-page report due at 9 o'clock the next morning. It's like, yes, okay. And then we have to like do it. And those corporate systems can kind of be top down heavy too. And then that we can feel that. And I know that all of us feel that. And rather, sometimes we feel like we might be feeling, you know, bumped around a little bit by our sense of bureaucracy and our sense of time. Time has really been distorted over you know, this 3 health crisis time. Time is no longer cyclical or predictable. Time has become this really weird, fluid and subjective kind of sense that we're trying to navigate as well. So that's what we know. That's the context and how we're showing up. I know that doesn't really sound inspiring or very strong or celebrating our resilience, but I want to honor and recognize that if you are feeling that, here, let's hold this in a moment of validation. If you are not feeling any of these things in the last 2 screens, then let's just have some awareness in that this is how some of us may be showing up to this work. And it's not a bad thing. It's just the nature of the organization and the field of the work that we work in. But now switching gears, I would just like to talk about and share, you know, teachings on how, when I look back at you know, what I've learned about strength, grace, and resilience in a First Nations context from my elders and knowledge keepers and mentors and coaches over the years. I'm going to lean towards, the 7 sacred teachings, the 7 sacred laws, and apply them to how we might be able to mobilize them as healthcare professionals in a time of a health crisis. And so I offer them lightly and with humility, hoping that you might resonate with them as reminders, good reminders from spirit, good reminders from mentors, good reminders from elders. If you're hearing some of these teachings for the first time, I hope that you share them with your own friends, your own colleagues, who might be also feeling this sense of whatever we're feeling in a time of a crisis. And so the first one is love. And again, love is that weird word in a contemporary sense, in a work sense. We don't really talk about love in our professional domains, do we? But love is one of the more paramount 7 sacred teachings in our Indigenous cultures across Turtle Island. But love is what you make of it. So call it caring, call it compassion, call it aligning with somebody or supporting somebody, whatever it is. It's all about that being a good human being. So I often think about, our teachings in the Longhouse are always about, how to be a good human being, how to walk this path called life and be a good human being. Will always come to a place of love, which is a universal human need and want and desire. And in a very corporate and colonial sense, we say that there's no room for love here, right? We must be professional and grounded in our cognitive ability to do work. But I think one of the things, that is worth celebrating is that we have a no one is left behind culture. That's reflected in our First Nations Health Authority mission and values and directives, is that no one gets left behind here. And then this is just a reminder to fill your cup, whatever filling your cup looks like. How do you take care of yourself? And self-care isn't just all about, bubble baths and massages and teas. Those are great. But, filling your cup and self-care is also about getting onto the land. Self-care is also about holding your boundaries. Self-care is also about saying no. Self-care is also about, having a check-in culture with your team or with your manager or with your boss or with a friend outside of your team circle, where somebody's going to have your back. That's love, and that's self-care as well. And then point number 3, acceptance and surrendering, is kind of what I would say is letting go of some things. When we're working in a time of crisis, it's really easy to be in go mode, that we're responding. And that kind of becomes this really chaotic cycle of just ideas and actions. And that doesn't leave a lot of room for our own creativity or our own wellness to be able to show up and do the work in a good way. So we can get lost in it. And sometimes if we get lost in it, we can attach ourselves to ideas. And sometimes those ideas will get lost in that machine of that never-ending cycle. And so when we attach onto something like that is really holding on to our spirit, holding on to our mind. And we know this is when we're feeling frustrated, when we're feeling angry, when we're feeling doubtful, when we're having those feelings. That's our spirit and our energy telling us, I think we're holding on to something that we no longer need to hold on to. So what we need to do is accept that what is happening is not going our kind of way. And I blow this all the time because I work in the overdose crisis, and I'm very not passionate, compassionate. I'm very driven by the activism and advocacy that it takes to do this work. And I go full on and get attached to ideas, and sometimes see things that I don't want to see or that I don't agree with in my own community or in my own professional practice. And then I'll latch onto it and I hold on to it, and then it weighs me down in a time of a crisis when you have a million other things pulling you in another direction. And what I've learned by reflecting on teachings from my grandmother, from Katie as well, her name was Agnes Pierre, was you have to let go of it. And if you don't let go of it, what it's going to do is it's going to make you sick. Because if you think back to, if we need to process it, mentally process it, and we mentally process it by letting it go. So like imagine if you're eating food and you eat this incredible, huge meal, and you don't let go of it. You hold on to it. It doesn't leave your body. What happens? Your body will get sick. Well, you'll be full of shit, but you'll be sick as a result, because your body's not processing, the waste, the toxins, letting go of it. And I always hold that analogy in my mind, is that when you're stuck on an idea or a thought or a challenge or a conflict in a time of a crisis, and we don't process it and surrender it and let it go, it will weigh us down and it can make us sick. And as Indigenous people, we are masters at acceptance and surrendering. If you look at every prayer, every ceremony, it is about process. We call it things like gratitude and appreciation and nurturing spirit. But if you peel back the layers of the prayers and the intention of the prayers, the intention of our ceremonies, what it really is about processing, processing grief, processing gratitude, processing, when we ground ourselves in work, it's being grounding ourselves in the here and now, so that we're not bringing our previous meetings with us into this physical space. So I always offer this as a reminder of acceptance and surrendering. The second law is the law of respect. So not forgetting to celebrate the unmeasurable successes and wins. And sometimes, I just like to do this within my own teams or social groups, is like, who's got good news to share? Does anybody have a story that they want to share, that's a success or a win, and then celebrating those? Hey, so-and-so went through this thing, and then celebrating it and making a big fuss about it. Pausing every now and then, as I've said, our healthcare system is driven by ideas and actions, ideas and actions, ideas and actions. Wellness cannot exist in that model. Cultural safety cannot exist in that model. Creativity cannot exist in that model. What we want to do every now and then is inject a pause between the idea and the actions. And that's easier said than done, I know, because of the system that we work in. But something to walk away with is thinking about, where can we pause every now and then? I would say even just us gathering here today to do what we're doing and talking about this is a good reflection of a pausing kind of moment. And number 3, being on a team is like being in a family. Everybody's got a role to play. Everybody's got about their part to fulfill around the campfire, and just having the respect for the process to be able to do that. Number 3, honesty. That's just really being honest with ourselves. And we are often our hardest critic, our hardest judge, and just remember to be honest with ourselves, that we have something special. To be here working in the system that we're working in, to belong to the organization and the teams that we belong to, is to have something special, to have something that we can cherish. Because we might not ever get this time back. This is a moment of history. We are working in 3 healthcare crises, but we get to be a part of the solutions at the end of the day. And I think that is really something special. And so honesty is not just, the good. Honesty is like the realness that we're kind of showing up to. And I think that that is something that I like to remember, is that, this might not happen again, but later on in stages of life, I can look back and say, hey, yeah, I was a part of working and contributing to those crises that were way back in 2020 and 2021. And having the honesty that adversity, like working in a crisis, introduces us to ourselves. We learn a lot about ourselves. And I think that we forgot about this as a society, given the last decade. And the amount of distractions we have through social media. We kind of get easily distracted. But also working in a crisis and living in a time of a crisis has really introduced us to new aspects of ourselves that we might not have had the opportunity to do before. And lastly, identify what is you and what is not you. Humility. We cannot function without faith. Faith is also a really weird word, because we all have different associations to the word, but really finding out what your faith is and leaning in towards your faith. I know that when we talk about crisis, we often act in fear. And then for us, for our families and our friends, because we work for a health organization, you know, often we will be the ones that are kind of like the go-to for questions, because we might have friends or relatives or people that we see in society that are feeling very fearful, and we may carry that fear ourselves in return because of uncertainty. We don't know what's going to happen. We're afraid that we might get sick. We're afraid our loved ones might get sick. We're afraid for, you know, our relatives to be experiencing racism in the healthcare system. We're afraid for overdoses happening in our family groups and our community groups. But I always say it's like, you know, we always want to balance our fears out with our faith and leaning in towards your faith. And so I practice this one as often as I possibly can, is when I get that sense of fear, and it happens often. Is as soon as I get a sense of fear, I'm like, okay, I've trained myself as to, okay, reach for my faith, reach for my faith, whether that's faith in my family, faith in the creator, or most of the time it's finding that faith in myself, that you're going to be all right. It's going to be hard. It's going to be messy. It's going to be icky, but you're going to be all right. Number 2, our work is intergenerational. I know the conversations that we had last week or the week before, you know, there's this really sense of urgency, and I respect our sense of urgency working in a time of crisis, but I also like to balance out that sense of urgency by responding to racism, by responding to a global pandemic, by responding to the overdose crisis, that we do have a sense of urgency. We want to save lives and improve the quality of the communities that we serve. So I appreciate the sense of urgency, but I often remind myself to lean into that this work is intergenerational, and our job may seem like to fix it and make it perfect. But when I think about, you know, the wisdom and knowledge of our teachings, I think that the majority of our teachings are rooted in 7 generations, multiple generations, that our job isn't to fix it and make it perfect. Our job is to do what we can with the time that we have, so that the people who come after us, you know, will have a better benefit and a better advantage moving forward. And that gives me a little bit more patience in the work. Number 3 is asking for help. Is a sign of strength. I think that, you know, in a very colonial and corporate sense, asking for help is a sign of weakness. But in a cultural sense, you know, asking for help is a sign of strength, and correction for when we make a mistake is a sign of care. And I remember my relatives telling me this all the time when I made mistakes growing up in my teenage years. I'm not telling any stories. They said things like, I love you and I care for you, and that's why I'm telling you. If I didn't care, I wouldn't say a thing. And I really love that, and I hold on to that a lot. It's like when you care about somebody, you often, you know, use your correction. And I say that because in a time of crisis, we're going to have different ideas that might not match or align all the time. And so we might be correcting one another. Truth, the power of being united, nutsamot. And I know this comes up quite often in our prayers, our Coast Salish prayers or speeches, is nutsamot, one heart, one mind. The truth is the power of being one. In a time of crisis, you know, wonderful things can happen. You know, we pray for rain together as nutsamot, and we can bring rain. We give thanks for the first salmon of the season, and then we get a blessed salmon. So that power of being one is something to be not underestimated. 2, the seasonal cycle is just recognizing that there is a natural process and flow of nature, of Mother Earth. That, you know, we would love for it to be summertime all the time in Coast Salish territory, but there's a natural order to the seasonal cycle, and that means that we will go through some winters. And those winters, you know, might be emotional. That it means we're going to have our highs and we're going to have our lows. We're going to have our highs and we're going to have our lows. And the planet, the country, the province, you know, is not exempt from that seasonal cycle. There is a natural order of ups and downs, and what will go will eventually come around again. And so just recognizing that, you know what, this is maybe a winter, a seasonal winter for a lot of us in our own wellness and how we show up to this work and for the communities that we serve. But, you know, that won't be forever. That a springtime will roll around, a summertime will roll around, and then the order will kind of continue. And the truth is, for the 3rd point there, is that you belong here. There is no coincidence in our faith. There's no coincidence in how we view the world, that what is meant to happen is meant to happen. And so even with your very presence for your job title, your role in this organization, your role within your team, the things that you say, the things that you are learning in this crisis, is all in sync with you being here now, and that matters. So leaning into that and not forgetting that. So if you're having moments of doubt, if you're having moments of internal conflict, like, am I doing enough? Am I saying enough? Should I be here now? Really honoring and recognizing that, in our cultural teachings, nothing happens by accident. So, in teachings, at least in my co-Salish teachings, when we're sitting in the longhouse, they say what's meant to happen is always meant to happen. What's meant to be shared is meant to be shared. What's meant to be learned is meant to be learned. It doesn't mean that we're going to get the full gamma of what we thought we were going to get. Even if you get one small thing, that's what's meant for you at that very moment. And that's an aspect of this universal truth that we believe. Wisdom, my experience is my strength. Our collective experience is our collective strength. When I think about wisdom is usually coming from a place of experiences. And in a Western worldview, we really hold education and a training in a high regard, and not so much experience, because if you look at a lot of the job postings, people want doctorates and master's degrees and bachelor's degrees and not a lot of experience. So I think that wisdom really kind of comes from the more experiences that we kind of acquire. And so my experience contributes to my strength. Our collective experience as a team and an organization is our collective strength moving forward. Calling out and calling in is really just, honoring and recognizing that in a time of a crisis, things get hot, things get heavy, things get heated. And sometimes we end up calling people out, calling team members out, and just remembering that, calling out has its place, but calling in is bringing us our experiences together for the purposes of shared learning. And so always looking for a learning moment where we can share each other's wisdom is a great way to mobilize our strength, our collective strength. And then number 3, what we need is just below our fears. And so this is, where we arrive at true compassion. How do we get true compassion? Is, when we face our fears, we can find ourselves accessing compassion really quick and in a hurry. And I know that's easier said than done, because often when we're presented with something fearful in front of us, our first instinct is to go the other direction. But because that's our comfort level, and we go for distraction, we go for avoidance. But just remembering and recalling every time you were afraid of something, whether it was in your childhood and you were afraid to ride your bike for the first time, or you were learning how to swim and you were afraid of the deep end of the water, or it was your very first job interview that you've ever had that was in a professional corporate sense, all the fears that went along with that contributed to what you needed to be where you are today. So fear, we can mobilize in a good way too. And what we need usually is just behind or just under the fears that are ahead of us. And when a time of crisis is around, there's a lot of fear. And it's just recognizing that fear is not necessarily a bad thing. And last but not least, bravery. So decolonizing our vulnerability, being vulnerable with ourselves and with others. Number 2, being conscious of our own power and how we're engaging and using and mobilizing our powers. And number 3, being accountable for the energy we bring to this work. So I know that we think it is all about us. And it's easy to get caught up in that it's my ideas, it's my actions, it's what I'm up against, it's what I'm struggling with today. And it's really easy to get internalized and get stuck in our own heads and we think it's about us. But we also need to be very mindful in a time of crisis that we are being accountable for the energy that we kind of are projecting out there too. Our tone, our behaviors, the language that we use with one another. Again, to kind of come back to a place of love and using care, compassion, and kindness in the work that we do, which I know we all do. But again, just as gentle reminders for how we can care for one another and support one another in times of crisis. So that is pearls of wisdom that I have had the honor of being able to have shared with me, and that I never imagined that I would one day share in settings like these. Again, I offer them lightly and with humility. I hope that you have found them to be good in terms of validating what you may be thinking, what you may be feeling. If you're walking away with a pearl of wisdom that group rooted in Indigenous knowledge and values, then I think that that is a tremendous win to walk away with. And so in closing, because I'm not going to try and bring up that board again, what are your hopes that you are taking away with you today? Whether you're hopeful for one of the crises, whether you're hopeful for your team, or you're hopeful for your family, or just personally, or for your professional practice, what are your hopes? And that I just thought we would end on a light note of just sharing, what are you hopeful for moving forward? So I'm just going to stop sharing the screen, and what I'm going to do is just zip it and then just see if there are any. I'm just going to open up the floor to see what people are thinking, what people are feeling, if anybody wants to share a story, and then we'll officially close and begin the weekend. Hopeful for seeing your family again. Yes, absolutely. Travel, yes, hands down. I'm getting my travel itch. I need to be somewhere where it's really hot and shiny. Potlatching, oh yes. To be curious, to continue to learn, and to acknowledge the reason we are where we are is real. Learning to accept what I cannot fix. I love these. Thank you for sharing. Hugs. Gatherings, friends, family, and colleagues. Yep. Pets, yes. It was super distracting. I have a little kitten that was like playing around my computer the entire time I was presenting those slide decks. Okay, thank you. If you're in the middle of typing, go ahead and continue on typing. I cannot see anybody's face, but if you can use your reaction button to let me know you are okay and you are here. And if you had found this conversation to be a little bit helpful. All right, I'm seeing everybody's hearts and thumbs up. Thank you so much.